Hello everyone, my name is Mulutra Enoch and we are going to revise together BI 110 under Taxonomy and Bacteria. And the question reads, explain the biological species concept and elaborate the problems associated with it. So we can start. So what you should understand is that biological species concept, that is just the concept that defines a species as the organism that are able to interact and successfully interbreed to produce fertile offspring. So I'll say biological species concept is a concept that defines a species as organisms that are able to interact and successfully interbreed to produce fertile offsprings. So biological species concept is a concept that defines a species as organisms that are able to interact and successfully interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Now, what you should bear in mind is that there are certain problems associated with the biological species concept, or the things that the biological species concept have left out. So the first one we have cloning. So I'll say problems associated are, the first one is cloning. So under cloning, you find to say that this concept have not or haven't included organisms that reproduce asexually. That does not involve the fusion of gamete like bacteria. So I'll say it does not apply to organisms that are able to reproduce asexually, e.g. bacteria. And then apart from that, the second problem associated with this principle is that the second one is variation. So what you should bear in mind is that variation, that is just the natural differences in traits among organisms of the same species. Now you find out to say that there are certain species like Junco caniceo and Junco Genus. Those are two birds that lives in different places, but they are able to interact and produce fertile offspring. But under biological species concept, you find to say that they are classified as different organism, leaving the work for the ornithologist So ornithologists, those are just people who have studied orthology, things to do with the birds. So I'll say natural differences among natural differences in traits among organisms of the same species, e.g. junco, canicel, another one is junco, Genus. You can also put domestic dogs. So the third one is hybrid. So the third problem is hybrid. So under hybrid, you find to say that there are certain organisms that are able to interact and interbreed to produce fertile offspring. But you find to say that those offspring that are produced have distinct features from their parents. So you find to say that this concept haven't yet included that. So I'll say it occurs between two distinct species that produce fertile offspring. Examples that I can give is the mew. This is an organism that is produced or obtained when a horse is crossed with a donkey. So under biological species concept, you find out to say that the horse and a donkey, they are classified as a different organism, yet they are able to mate and produce fertile offspring, which is a mew. You find to say that these organisms that are produced, they are genetically different from their parents. So we proceed to the next question. These are the required solutions that we are supposed to be at first question. So second question, that is B, they are saying, what is the importance of using the binomial nomenclature system to name species? So we can answer that one. So the importance of using a binomial nomenclature system to name organism is that it provides so like I said, it provides the universal precise and stable identifier identifiers for organisms worldwide. So what does this mean? So you find to say that the importance is that it provides universal, precise, and stable identifier for organisms worldwide, helping to prevent what communication barriers. Another thing is that prevent the use of descriptive words when referring to an organism. Another one you find to say that it also names act as the means of reference. So we can proceed to the next one. So they are saying define the following terms. So the first one is couplet followed by lead, character state, morphology, taxon, and phylogeny. So we can start. So a couplet. So a couplet, that is just the pair of contrasting statements in a dichotomous key that guides toward the identification of organisms. So I'll say a pair of contrasting statement in a dichotomous key that guides toward the identification of organism. So in short, the good example you find to say that in dichotomous key there is another statement saying it has color, the other one will be opposing to say it has no color, meaning those two statements are what are contrasting each other. So that is a couplet. And then the second one, they said a lead, we define a lead. So lead. So a lead, that is just an individual statement within a couplet that provide a description and the direction on where to go next in a key. So I'll say individual statement within a couplet that provides description and the direction on where to go next in a key. So we define a lead in that manner. So we proceed to the next one. The next one is the character. So we define a character to say it is an observable feature just in an organism. So what you are able to observe from an organism, let's take for instance, you find out to say that the tree has green leaves. So that is a character of that particular organism. And then we can also proceed to another terminology called a character state. So character state. So a character state, that is just an alternative form of a trait of an organism. So an alternative form of a trait of an organism. So an alternative form of a trait of an organism is what we call a character state. Like I said, an observable feature, we can say a tree has green leaves, but its character state, you find to say that those same green leaves, are they rounds or wrinkled like that? Those are the character state of that particular organism. That's a good example I can give under that definition. So we can also proceed to another terminology called morphology. So morphology, that is just the field in biology that deals with the study of structures and forms of organisms. So field in biology that deals with the study of structures and forms of an organism. That is what we call the morphology. And then the last but not the least, we have what we call the taxon. So taxon is just the specific group of organism in the binomial system. So a specific group of organism in a binomial classification system. So a specific group of organism in a binomial system is what we call a taxon. So in the hierarchical structure, we find to say that we have domain followed by kingdom. So domain itself on its level is a taxon, and then followed by a kingdom. A kingdom itself there on itself is also referred to as a taxon. And I'm saying a specific group of organism in a binomial classification system is what we refer to as taxon. And then we proceed to the last one. The last one is phylogeny. So phylogeny, that is just the study of evolutionary history, development, and the relationship among organisms. So I'll say the study of evolutionary history, development, and relationships among organisms. So that is what we refer to as what? A phylogeny. So these are the required definitions that we are supposed to be on question C. So we proceed to the next one. So the next question, they are saying, using specific example, explain differences between genus and a species. So we can answer that one also. So we can define a genus to say a genus is a group of closely related species, e.g. So the question is saying with the example. So make sure whenever you are answering this kind of question, you understand what the question is all about. So I'll give an example of Panthera. Panthera, that is just a genus that includes Panthera leo, which is a lion, and then we have another genus called Panthera tigris, which is a tiger. So I'll say while, since we are differentiating, while a species is a group of organism that are able to interact and interbreed to produce better offspring. So e.g. the Panthera itself, that is just the species, e.g. the Panthera. So there are a lot of examples that you can give under that one. So under mammals, you can also put Homo sapien. So we can proceed to the next one. Those are the required solutions that we are supposed to be at question 2. So the next one, they are saying, state any 4 operating mechanisms in nature which ensures the species are isolated. So that kind of question is coming from reproductive isolated organism. So there are about 4 mechanisms that can prevent reproduction to take place. So the first one, you find to say that we have ecological isolation. So ecological isolation is simply where we have 2 organisms that are living in different geographical area. You find to say that when the time of mating, it's very difficult for them to either travel so that they can mate. So another one, we have behavioral isolation. So under behavioral isolation, so that is where it involves certain organism making or behaving in different ways. So the good example that I can give is frogs. So you find to say that frogs, they crow during time of mating, or when they are about to mate, they have to produce a certain sound. That is just a behavior. So another one, we have mechanical isolation. So under mechanical, that is where you put the physical barrier. Let's take for instance, you have male dogs and female dogs, and then in between you separate them using or building a offense. It means that the offense that you have put there is the mechanical, the physical barrier that is preventing those dogs from mating or interbreeding. So the last one is temporal isolation. So this one involves organisms that are able to reproduce at different times. So let's take for instance, you find to say that there are certain organisms or trees that are able to release or produce anthers maybe during the night, and then there are other organisms that are able to also open their female parts of the flowers or plants. Maybe those they are opening during the day. That simply means that it's very difficult for reproduction to take place because they are also taking place at different time. So the next question they are saying, what characteristics of all species according to the biological species concept? So the first characteristic for the biological species concept of the species, the first one is interbreeding. So that simply means that organisms has to mate with one another in a natural environment. So the first characteristic, like I've said, is interbreeding, where organism has to mate with one another in the natural environment. And then the second one, we have fertile offspring. So long as it is a species, it has to produce fertile offspring. So what I'm going to talk about this one is that you find to say that produced offspring that are produced from mating must also be able to reproduce. So I'll say offsprings produced from mating must also be able to reproduce. So the good example that I can give there, let's say for instance, two dogs made to produce the baby dog. You find to say that organism that have been produced by those two dogs after mating, if it produces another organism after mating with the other dog, it means that organism is what? Fertile. Another one or another characteristic of species is that reproductive isolation. So what does it mean? So organisms are biologically prevented from breeding with the organism of another species. So like reproductive isolation is just the psychological process that involves or that prevents organism of other species from interbreeding. Let's say, for instance, there is no way a duck can mate with a dog to produce another organism. That is impossible. So that I can say organisms are what biologically prevented from breeding or interbreeding. They're interbreeding with the organisms of other species. So those are the possible solutions that we are supposed to be there. And then if you want, you can also include shared gene pools, where organisms that are able to mate, they are able to share certain common genetical materials from each other. We can proceed to the next question. So the third question, they are saying cyanobacteria are also